Hello again, Nicole Mashburn, and now I want to talk to you about athletic training and some developmental changes of the muscular system. So when we talk about exercise, a lot of people want to know what can I do to increase my strength or my endurance or be a better athlete. So I wanted to go back and remind you of a few things that will help you increase contractile force. And so when I say contractile force, I'm talking about the strength of the muscle. And so if you remember, the more muscle fibers that you activate, the stronger the contraction that you get, right? So the more you activate, the stronger the muscle will contract. The larger the muscle fibers, so the bigger the muscle cells, the stronger they are. The more frequently you stimulate them, the stronger the contraction. And if your sarcomeres are the right length, if you have the optimal length, you're going to have your strongest contraction. Well, this large muscle fiber, this is one of the primary ways that you can increase your strength. When you work out, you actually increase the diameter of those muscle cells, which gives you strength. You can also stretch your muscles and keep your sarcomeres. That's one of the ways you can keep your muscles at the optimal length is stretching exercises. So there are things that you can physically do to make sure your muscles are optimized and strong. So let's talk about some specific things that exercise does for the muscles. So let's talk about a few effects of exercise. If you do aerobic exercises, remember the ones that use oxygen, these are your endurance, your long-lasting exercises. What do these actually do for you? Well, when you do endurance exercises and you gradually increase your mileage or your time on the bicycle or your number of laps swimming, every time you increase that, you're going to build more and more endurance. And the way that happens is your muscle will actually put in more capillaries. And the capillaries, remember we have an artery and then there's a capillary bed and then a vein. This is where gas exchange occurs. So this allows you to get more oxygen to the muscle. Okay, so oxygen, aerobics, you want to get oxygen out there. The muscles will also develop more mitochondria. Remember, the mitochondria are your powerhouses. That's how you make your ATP. So you have more oxygen, more ATP, and you synthesize more myoglobin. That's the hemoglobin type molecule that carries oxygen or stores oxygen in the muscle. So if you increase all of these, you're going to increase your aerobic capacity. And so you do this over time. So like if you're going to run, you would run 5 miles, and then the next week maybe 5 and 5.5, and then 6, and then 7, and then 10. So as you increase your mileage and the time that you're running, your body responds by increasing the blood supply and oxygen capabilities of the muscle. So it's very much like the bones. If you exercise and put stress on bones, they respond by becoming stronger. The muscles do something very similar. They become more aerobic. So you get better endurance, more strength, and more resistance to fatigue. Remember when we talked about the different types of fibers, and I said, you're born with so many fibers? Well, you can actually change your fast glycolytic fibers into fast oxidative fibers. Those slow fibers, you're kind of born with those, okay? But these two can go back and forth. You can convert these fibers. So training will turn these anaerobic glycolytic fibers into aerobic fibers. So training does matter in allowing you to become an endurance runner. So you may not think you're a marathoner, but with the right training, you may be. Now the next thing are your resistance exercises like weightlifting, and these are typically anaerobic. These are things that you do in short burst movements like lifting weights. Typically what these are going to do is cause hypertrophy, and that increases the size of the fiber. So if you increase the fiber sizes inside the muscle, then the whole muscle will look bigger. Okay, so you're not really growing more muscle, you're just making more muscle cells, you're making those muscle cells larger. When you do that, you do increase your mitochondria and your myofilaments and glycogen stores and connective tissue. The whole muscle does get bigger, but the main result is an increase in fiber size, which increases the strength of the contraction. Now I'm going to throw a word out at you. Hypertrophy means to grow or to be bigger. So what do you think this word means? Let me write it out. Atrophy? Atrophy. So that would be the loss of muscle. So if you quit exercising, quit doing resistance training, and kind of let your muscles shrink back to their regular size or their size they were before, that's called atrophy. And you'll also see this in people maybe that are paralyzed, or if you've ever broken a limb, an arm, and you've had it in a cast, take the cast off and the muscle's not as big as it used to be. That's atrophy. So hypertrophy is getting bigger and atrophy is getting smaller. A lot of people think there might be hypotrophy or something like that, like HYPO, because we have hyper and hypo, but in this case it's hypertrophy and atrophy. So again, going back to the bones, we talked about Wolff's Law, where you needed to stress a bone to cause a bone to respond and become stronger. Muscles are real similar. You have to force a muscle to work hard in order for it to increase its strength. So kind of that no pain, no gain. So to increase your muscle strength and to increase muscle size, you've got to put more and more and more load on it. Your muscles easily adapt to the increased demands. You've got to overload them to produce gains. So what I'm saying is if you're starting a workout plan and so this week you're lifting 5 pounds and you do that for a week or two and all of a sudden it's kind of easier, it's not a big deal. Well, increase your weight to 6 and all of a sudden it'll be hard again. Well, you're stressing that muscle, you're overloading it, and it will respond. It will start to hypertrophy and get a little bigger, a little stronger. And you can continue to do that over weeks and months until finally you get to whatever high number you want it to be, say 15 pounds. And then if you want to just maintain that weight, you just continue that same weight to maintain what you have. Also, if you don't want real bulky muscles, you can stay at a certain weight, do higher reps, and maintain that muscle mass instead of doing more and more and more weight. So a lot of women especially don't want to have big bulky muscles. They want to look toned. And so you'll do low weight, high rep, and that will keep your muscles firm and you won't overload them as much and cause them to hypertrophy and bulk up. So what are some things that can limit the strength of the muscle? The supply of food and oxygen. Food, number one. You don't want to go work out on an empty stomach if you haven't eaten, eat some breakfast. You want to fuel that system so that you're able to work out efficiently. So muscles have to have food, glucose, and you need oxygen. And this is one of the reasons that you feel so bad at high altitude. If you've ever been to high altitude like Colorado and you can walk up the stairs, not only are you breathing hard, but your muscles are burning. They're in the anaerobic pathway and they're lacking oxygen. So you get that lactic acid burn just walking up the stairs. So that makes your availability of ATP is a very limiting factor. You've got to be able to keep ATP or the muscles can't contract. And again, muscle tone, the length of that muscle at rest. So again, stretching can be a good idea to make sure your muscles are always at their optimal tone, because when they're at their optimal tone, they're at their strongest. So the last thing we're going to cover are your developmental aspects. We usually mention this for each organ system and kind of tell you what happens from birth through childhood, adolescence to death. Never any good things as you get older. So once again, we'll kind of talk about that as far as the muscular system is concerned. One interesting thing about the muscular system is its development reflects neuromuscular coordination. So go back and think about the spine. Remember we talked about a child, a baby has a C-spine, and you get those curves in the neck when it lifts its head? Well, the muscular development, you're getting that neuromuscular development is going from head to toe, and then from proximal to distal out your arms and legs. So you raise your head, and then the muscles, the neuromuscular coordination of your head and neck is going to be first, and then you're going to sit up and you're going to get neuromuscular coordination and muscular development in your back. And then babies get to start using their hands, and you'll notice a lot of times their legs don't look very strong because they're not using them yet. You'd have no neuromuscular development there. Eventually, the child stands up and the muscular development of the legs gets stronger. This development goes from head to toe and proximal to distal. So this is also why if you take a 2-year-old and give them a crayon, they're going to grab it. Let me see if I got a crayon. Yeah, they're going to grab a crayon like that. They don't have the neuromuscular development and coordination of their hands yet. This is very distal. So give them a couple of years and then they can hold a pencil and then they can write. So don't force your child to write if they're not ready, because they haven't developed that neuromuscular coordination quite yet. All of this peaks around mid-adolescence, so most of you guys are past your peak. I'm sorry about that. But athletics and training can improve your neuromuscular control. So if the first time you go out and someone throws a ball at you and you've got a baseball bat and you try to hit it and miss, it's okay. You can train neuromuscular control. So the more you practice, the more you train, the better you get. Practice, practice, practice increases your ability to do this because you're improving your neuromuscular control. A few other things between males and females, we talked about it with the bones. In the females, skeletal muscle is only about 36% of our body mass. We've got more fat and water. In males, they're 42% muscle mass. And this is due to testosterone, which is the male hormone. But one thing to remember is the muscle strength, the body strength per muscle mass is the same in both sexes. So if you were to take a gram of muscle in a male and a gram of muscle in a female, they have the same contractile force. They're equally as strong. Males are just stronger than women because they have more muscle mass. They just simply have more muscles. As you get older, you do start to get more connective tissue, more fat deposition. So the muscles may look the same size, but they're flabby. You're getting less muscle fibers and more connective tissue and fat. And by age 30, you've lost a lot of muscle mass, okay? You start to lose muscle mass at age 30 and it continues to decline throughout your lifespan. And this natural loss of muscle mass is called sarcopenia, okay? So sarcopenia is that natural loss of muscle mass due to age. But all hope is not lost. You can help slow that down and even reverse it if you exercise. So those of you that are coming back to school in your new 30s and 40s, make sure you have a regular exercise program to help reduce that muscle loss, just like in bone health. So the more you exercise, the more stress you put on those muscles, the more stress you put on those bones, the stronger and more healthy they will be, okay? So make sure that you're working out and keeping those muscles nice and strong. And remember, if those muscles are strong, they're pulling on those bones and making those bones strong as well. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about is a homeostatic disease. We've talked about some things every unit about, we've talked about burns and skin cancer, and we've talked about osteoporosis. And so for the muscles, I usually mention muscular dystrophy. And this one is interesting. We've talked about hypertrophy and atrophy. Well, dystrophy, so that really kind of means abnormal, okay, so not quite right. And muscular dystrophy, a lot of times it's called MD. You may have seen the telephone on TV. This is a group of inherited muscle-destroying diseases. Okay, so you get it from the genes from your mom and your dad. Typically from your mom. It's a sex-linked gene carried by females and expressed in the male. So you get it from your mom, usually, and the reason it's called dystrophy is a lot of times the muscles look large and healthy, but in fact their muscles are large because they have a lot of fat and connective tissue deposits, and so they don't have a lot of fibers. The fibers have atrophied, so they look normal, but their composition is abnormal, so dystrophy. So a lot of fat and connective tissue. Well, fat and connective tissue don't contract. You don't have enough fibers for your muscles to contract. So they're weak and they're uncoordinated and they don't work real well. When you think about muscular dystrophy, the most common type is called Duchenne's. And it's the most common. It's also very severe. And usually sometime in the late adolescence, early adolescence, somewhere late childhood, early adolescence, you'll start to see your victims will become clumsy. Maybe they'll start to fall, and you may not notice that at first because we all go through that awkward stage where we're clumsy and fall, but you start to notice that these people do it more often. And so they have trouble walking. They'll need to have some kind of support, maybe a wheelchair. And unfortunately, in their 20s, they usually succumb because they die of respiratory failure. Remember, all your breathing muscles, that's all skeletal muscle, and eventually those become ineffective and you lose the ability to breathe and you die. There's no cure. There are some gene therapies and some stem cell therapies out there that show promise, but at this point, there's no true cure for muscular dystrophy. So that's going to be the disease we talk about this time. When we get into the nervous system, we'll talk about a whole other host of diseases that also affect the muscles, but they're affecting the muscles from the nervous system in. So this is a muscular disease that's actually a problem with the muscle, and we'll talk about some other like paralysis that has to do more with the nervous system. So that's all I'm going to talk about. I appreciate your time, I appreciate your attention, and I will see you later.